By the time the final pen opened, most buyers had already left the auction barn. The strongest pigs had sold first. They were broad through the shoulders, heavy for their age, and quick to push toward the feed trough whenever someone approached. The last group looked nothing like them. 42 piglets stood crowded behind a rusted gate. Their coats were rough, their bodies narrow, and several showed ribs beneath loose skin. Some were smaller because they had been weaned too early. Others had spent weeks losing the competition for food to stronger animals. They were not dying, but they looked like animals no sensible farmer would choose. Walter Crane stood near the loading ramp with several men from town. "You would spend more feeding those than they will ever return," he said. Another farmer laughed. "Sell the fence, leave the pigs." The auctioneer looked across the room. One lot, all 42, no hands rose. Evelyn Hart studied the animals from the back row. Most buyers saw weakness. She looked for behavior. One small piglet waited until the others left the trough, then stepped forward and ate quickly. Two were rooting beneath the straw. Another pushed at the gate whenever light appeared through the boards. They were alert. They were hungry. They had not stopped trying. Evelyn raised her hand. The room went quiet. The auctioneer pointed toward her. $15 each. No one challenged the bid. The hammer fell, sold. Laughter returned immediately. Everyone in town knew Evelyn had inherited the Hart farm 6 months earlier. They also knew the property included an orchard that had not produced a proper crop in years. 12 acres of old apple trees stood behind the farmhouse. Dead branches crowded the crowns. Thorn brush filled the rows. Grass grew thick around the trunks. Rotten fruit disappeared beneath weeds each autumn and remained there until spring. People called it the forgotten orchard because no one remembered the last year it had earned enough to matter. Walter walked beside Evelyn as she prepared the borrowed trailer. "What are you going to do with them? Put them in the orchard." He stopped. "That orchard, yes." He turned toward the others. "She bought sick pigs for dead trees." More laughter followed. Evelyn secured the trailer gate. "They are underweight," she said. "Not sick." Walter looked through the bars. "They will tear up every root they find." They could. They will strip bark. If they reach it, they will turn the place into mud. If they stay too long. Walter frowned. Her answers were not defensive enough to satisfy him. "Then why buy them?" "Because the orchard needs work I cannot afford to hire." He looked toward the trailer again. "And those are your workers. They are one part of the plan." By sunset, the piglets were inside a small paddock at the edge of the orchard. Evelyn had not released them among all 12 acres. She had fenced a narrow section containing 4 trees. A double electric line protected each trunk. The lower wire stopped the piglets from reaching the bark. The upper wire would matter later if they grew larger. Her 16-year-old son Ben carried water from the tank. "They look worse out here," he said. "They look smaller because the orchard is bigger." "How much did they cost?" $630. Ben stared at her. "We do not have $630 to waste." "I know. You could have bought 5 healthy pigs." "I did not need 5 healthy pigs." "What did you need?" Evelyn walked to the nearest apple tree. The trunk was scarred but solid. Above it, several branches were gray and brittle. Others were hidden behind thorny growth. She pulled apart the grass near the base. A thick mat of roots and dead leaves covered the ground. Beneath it, the soil was pale and tightly packed. Rainwater had collected in shallow depressions while the higher surface had hardened. She pushed a hand shovel into the ground. It stopped after several inches. Ben watched. "So the soil is bad." "Parts of it." "Then how do pigs fix that?" "They do not." His confusion deepened. Evelyn lifted a rotten apple from beneath the grass. The fruit had collapsed into a dark mass. Small larvae moved inside it. "This orchard has several problems," she said. "The pigs can help expose some of them." She pointed toward the ground. "They can eat fallen fruit. They can break the grass mat. They can uncover insects, tunnels, roots, and places where water is trapped. And then we decide what the orchard actually needs." The piglets began exploring. At first they stayed close together. Then one pushed its snout beneath the edge of the grass mat. Another joined it. Within minutes, several were pulling at shallow roots and searching through the leaf litter. Ben looked alarmed. "They are already digging. Only in this section." "What happens when they destroy it?" "We move them before that happens." Evelyn had divided the orchard into small paddocks. The pigs would remain in each one only long enough to disturb the surface and remove neglected material. They would leave before the ground became bare wet or deeply churned. Their work depended on limitation, Without fences and timing, Walter's warnings could become true. A truck slowed on the road. Walter was driving past with two other farmers. They looked across the fence and saw the piglets rooting beneath the old trees. One man pointed toward them. Even from a distance, Evelyn could hear the laughter. Ben lowered his eyes. They think we are desperate. We are short on money. That is not the same. No. Evelyn stepped into the paddock and watched the smallest piglet pull aside a section of dead grass. Beneath it, a cluster of fine roots appeared. She knelt and touched them. The roots were pale, flexible, and moist. Not rotten, not brittle. Alive. Ben crouched beside her. Those belonged to the apple tree, most likely. I thought the tree was dead. Parts of it may be. Evelyn looked upward through the tangled branches. The crown contained dead wood, but the root system beneath the grass was still active. That was the first distinction the town had failed to make. A damaged tree was not always a dead tree. A weak pig was not always a useless animal. The orchard and the piglets had been judged from a distance at the worst moment of their condition. Evelyn stood and looked across the remaining rows. She had not bought 42 animals because she believed they could perform a miracle. She had bought them because they could help remove the layer that prevented her from seeing what was still there. The pigs continued rooting beneath the first tree. For the first time in years, the ground around it began to open, and beneath everything the town had called dead, Evelyn had found living roots. The next morning, Evelyn walked the first paddock before feeding the piglets. The ground had changed overnight. Several patches of grass had been lifted from the edges. Rotten apples that had been hidden beneath the weeds were scattered across the surface. Shallow holes marked the places where the piglets had searched for roots and insects. Ben stood at the fence. It already looks worse. It looks exposed. That is not always better. No, Evelyn said. But now we can see what we are dealing with. She entered the paddock with a notebook, a hand shovel, and 3 colored ribbons. Red meant dead. Blue meant alive. Yellow meant uncertain. The first tree had a wide trunk with several deep cracks in the bark. Half the crown was gray and brittle. Evelyn broke a thin branch. It snapped cleanly. She tied red ribbon around it. Lower down, she scraped the bark from a younger branch with her thumbnail. Green tissue appeared beneath the surface. She tied blue ribbon there. Ben watched. So the same tree is both dead and alive. Different parts of it are. That was the problem with judging the orchard from the road. From a distance, each tree looked like one object. Up close, it contained several conditions at once. Dead limbs, living sapwood, damaged bark, dormant buds, roots still searching through compacted soil. Evelyn moved to the second tree. Thorn brush had grown tightly around the trunk. The piglets had opened a narrow path through it, revealing several places where rodents had gnawed the bark near the base. Ben crouched beside the damage. Could this kill the tree? If the bark is removed all the way around. He traced the wound carefully. The damage was serious, but incomplete. A strip of living bark still connected the roots to the crown. Evelyn tied yellow ribbon around the trunk. This one may recover. What does it need? Protection first, then less competition around the base. And we need to see whether water is collecting here. She pushed the shovel into the soil. The upper layer was soft where the pigs had disturbed it. Several inches down, the blade hit a dense layer. She tried again farther uphill. There the soil was firmer at the surface but easier to penetrate below. Ben looked between the two holes. Why are they different? The lower one stays wet longer. The upper one dries too hard. So one part has too much water and the other has too little. Sometimes both problems exist in the same orchard. They continued toward the far corner of the paddock. The piglets had uncovered a narrow depression filled with dark leaves and old roots. At first, Ben thought it was only a ditch made by the animals. Evelyn followed its direction. It ran between 2 rows of trees, then disappeared beneath a wall of thorn brush. She used the shovel to remove several inches of soil. Below it was a line of small, flat stones. This was built, she said. Ben knelt beside her. A drainage channel, possibly. The channel had been buried by years of leaves, soil, and unmanaged vegetation. If it once carried water away from the lower rows, its failure could explain why several nearby trees showed damage around the roots. Evelyn marked the location on the orchard map. They would not dig it out immediately. First, she needed to learn where it led. Changing drainage without understanding the slope could move water toward another weak area. The pigs had uncovered the beginning of the question. They had not provided the answer. After breakfast, Evelyn released them into a second paddock. The new section held 6 trees and heavier ground cover. She opened the connecting lane and placed a small amount of feed near the far end. The piglets followed slowly. Once they crossed, she closed the gate behind them. Ben looked at the first paddock. They did not remove all the grass. They were not supposed to. Several areas remained covered. Roots still held the surface together. The pigs had disturbed enough ground to expose hidden fruit tunnels and soil conditions without leaving the entire section bare. Evelyn spread straw over the most open patches. "Why cover it again?" Ben asked. "Because exposed soil can dry hard or wash away." "Then why uncover it in the first place, to inspect it and interrupt the thick mat?" She placed a small amount of finished compost beneath the straw, but kept it away from the trunks. The next step was not to leave the damage open. It was to replace uncontrolled cover with managed protection. That afternoon, Walter Crane stopped beside the road. He looked over the disturbed ground and smiled. "I see the workers have started." "They have. It looks like hog ground." "It was hidden orchard ground yesterday." Walter pointed toward the open patches. "First rain will turn that into mud, not if they are moved early and the surface is protected." He looked toward the second paddock. "You really think fencing changes what pigs are?" "No. It changes how long they can do the same thing in one place." Walter crossed his arms. "And what have they accomplished so far?" Evelyn pointed toward the newly exposed drainage stones. "They found part of an old water channel." Then she pointed toward the marked trunks. "They exposed rodent damage." Finally, she held up a bag containing several rotten apples and pale larvae. "And they uncovered fruit that has been feeding another generation of pests." Walter examined the bag. "Removing fruit will not restore those trees." "No. Then you still need to prune." "Yes." "Repair drainage." "Yes." "Manage disease." "Yes." He looked irritated. Each answer confirmed that Evelyn understood the limits of the animals. "Then the pigs are not the solution. They are the first step I could afford." Walter looked across the remaining orchard. 12 acres of tangled rows stretched behind the farmhouse. From where he stood, the work looked too large for one woman, one teenager, and 42 small animals. "You will spend the whole year cleaning this place and still have no apples." "That may happen. Then why not cut it down now?" "Because I have not finished checking what is alive." Walter shook his head and returned to his truck. Ben waited until he drove away. "What if he is right? He is right that some trees will not recover, and the rest we do not know yet." Evelyn walked to the third tree. The piglets had cleared enough weeds from its base to reveal a low branch growing beneath the dead crown. Small buds lined the branch. They were tightly closed but firm. She scraped the bark. Green appeared again. Ben touched one of the buds. This tree looked completely dead yesterday. It looked completely hidden. The orchard had not yet begun to recover, but it had begun to reveal itself, and each living branch made the town's judgment less certain. By the end of the second week, the piglets had moved through 4 paddocks. The pattern was becoming clear. Where the orchard looked thickest and greenest, the ground beneath it was often in the worst condition. Dense grass roots formed a tight mat around the trees. Fallen apples had rotted beneath it for years. Water remained trapped in low areas while the soil below had hardened into a compact layer. The orchard was not empty, it was hidden. Evelyn walked through the newest paddock with Ben carrying a bucket behind her. The piglets had already removed most of the fallen fruit. They had also exposed several small holes beneath the grass. Ben pointed toward one. "What made that?" Evelyn knelt and cleared away the loose soil. A narrow tunnel ran toward the base of an apple tree. "Rodents. Are they eating the roots? Possibly. They may also be damaging the bark." The thick weeds had given them cover. From the road, no one could see what was happening near the trunks. The piglets could. They followed scent insects and soft ground. Their rooting opened the surface and made hidden damage visible. Near the next tree, 3 piglets began tearing apart a pile of old fruit. Evelyn moved them aside and collected several apples before they disappeared. The fruit was dark and collapsed. Pale larvae moved inside the soft flesh. Ben looked into the bucket. "Why not let the pigs eat all of it? They can eat most of it. But I need to know what has been living here." The orchard had not stopped producing because of one problem. Old fruit supported pest cycles. Brush sheltered rodents. Grass competed for water. Block drainage weakened roots. Dead branches reduced light and airflow. The piglets were helping uncover those pressures one by one. They were not solving all of them. Evelyn placed the damaged apples into labeled bags. "What will you do with those?" Ben asked. "Identify the pests if I can. Then we will know what to watch for next season." Farther along the row, the piglets had opened a path beneath a wall of thorn brush. Behind it stood one of the oldest trees in the orchard. Its upper crown was gray, but a low branch reached toward the sunlight. Evelyn scraped the bark. Green tissue appeared beneath the surface. Ben leaned closer. That branch is alive. So is part of the trunk. She checked the base. Rodents had damaged one side, but the bark remained connected around most of the tree. Several firm buds lined the living branch. Evelyn tied blue ribbon around it. "What does blue mean again?" Ben asked. "Living structure worth keeping." And red deadwood, yellow uncertain. By the end of the morning, several trees carried all three colors. The orchard could no longer be judged as simply dead or alive. A single tree might contain a dead upper crown, a living lower branch, damaged bark, active roots, dormant buds. That changed the work. Truly, dead wood could be removed. Living branches needed protection. Uncertain sections required time. Evelyn began pruning only the branches that were clearly dead. She avoided cutting heavily because the trees were already weak. Ben watched her remove one brittle limb. Why not take all the dead branches now? Because some trees cannot handle severe pruning in one season. But dead wood does not help them. No. But removing too much at once can force weak trees to respond harder than their roots can support. She cleaned the saw before moving to the next tree. The town would have cut the orchard down quickly. Evelyn was doing the opposite. She was slowing down long enough to separate damage from death. That afternoon, Walter stopped at the fence. He looked over the disturbed paddock, then at the ribbons tied across the trees. What is all that? A record. Of what? What is living? What is dead? What still needs testing? He walked closer to the blue-marked branch. One green branch does not make a productive tree. No. And one living root does not make a healthy orchard. No. Walter looked toward the piglets. Then what have they proved? That the town judged the property without examining it. He touched the blue ribbon but said nothing. Evelyn pointed toward the open ground. Before they came, I could not see the rodent damage the blocked channel or the living shoots beneath the brush. You still need to fix all of that. Yes. The pigs cannot prune. No. They cannot rebuild drainage. No. They cannot manage disease. No. Walter looked frustrated. Then why do you keep acting as if they matter? Because they are doing the first job. What job? Making the orchard readable. That answer silenced him. The piglets had not restored anything yet, but they had changed what could be seen. Walter looked across the remaining rows. Most still appeared dark and tangled. Only the cleared sections revealed the differences beneath them. Some trees were beyond saving, others were damaged but alive. A few still carried strong lower wood beneath dead crowns. Walter released the ribbon. You will not know whether they can fruit until spring. I know, and even then flowers do not guarantee apples. I know that too. He returned to his truck without laughing. That evening, Evelyn moved the piglets into the next paddock. Their bodies were beginning to change. Their ribs were less visible. Their coats looked smoother. The smallest still struggled to reach the main trough, so Evelyn added another feeding station at the far end. Ben noticed. They are gaining. They are eating without being pushed away. Do you think they were weak only because they were neglected? Not all of them. Some may always stay small. She watched the smallest piglet enter the new paddock. It immediately began searching beneath the grass. But poor conditions can make a healthy animal look worthless. Ben looked toward the orchard, and poor conditions can make a living tree look dead. Evelyn nodded. Near the blue ribbon branch, several buds had begun to swell. They were still too small to identify. Not flowers, not proof. Only another sign that the orchard had more life left than anyone expected. The fifth paddock changed Evelyn's understanding of the orchard. The piglets had been rooting along a shallow depression between two rows when one of them uncovered a line of flat stones. At first, Ben thought it was part of an old fence. Evelyn followed the stones uphill. They formed a narrow channel running beneath the grass, then disappeared under thorn brush near the northern slope. This was built to move water, she said. Ben looked toward the lower rows. Then why is the ground still wet? Because the channel is blocked. Years of leaves, soil, and fallen branches had filled it. Water that once drained away now remained around the lower trees after heavy rain. The result was visible in their trunks. Several had darkened bark near the base. Moss covered the shaded sides. Fine roots had grown close to the surface where they could reach more oxygen. The orchard had not simply been abandoned. Its drainage system had failed slowly. Evelyn did not clear the whole channel immediately. She opened a short section first, then poured water into it to see which direction it moved. The water traveled several feet before stopping beneath another layer of packed leaves. Ben picked up the shovel. We could dig the whole thing out today, and send all the water somewhere we have not checked. He lowered the shovel. Evelyn marked the channel on her orchard map. They would clear it in stages, watching where the water collected after each section was opened. The pigs had revealed the old structure. Restoring it required caution. Later that morning, an elderly woman appeared at the orchard gate. Her name was Margaret Bell. She had worked there as a teenager decades before the property passed into Evelyn's family. Margaret leaned on the fence and studied the newly exposed rows. "I had forgotten how wide the channels were," she said. Evelyn walked toward her. "You remember them. We cleaned them every autumn." Margaret pointed toward the northern slope. There was another one near the stone wall. It carried water away from the cider trees, the old russets. Evelyn looked across the orchard. Most people in town had dismissed the apples as small and unattractive. Walter had called them poor market fruit. Margaret explained that the orchard had never been planted mainly for perfect table apples. Some trees produced sweet fruit for fresh eating. Others produced firm, sharp apples that stored well. The darker, rough-skinned apples had been pressed for cider because their flavor became more valuable when blended. The fruit was never uniform, Margaret said. That was the point. Ben frowned. Why did the orchard stop making money? The buyer changed. Years earlier, a packing company had begun demanding larger, more consistent fruit. The old varieties did not fit the new standard. Maintenance declined. The drainage channels filled. Fallen fruit remained beneath the trees. Several severe winters damaged branches that were never properly pruned. The orchard became less productive, then less valuable, and finally forgotten. Its failure had not begun because the trees were useless. It had begun because the market stopped valuing what they produced. Margaret entered the orchard and walked slowly toward a tree on the upper slope. Its crown was mostly dead, but two lower branches carried blue ribbons. She pressed her palm against the trunk. This one gave the best cider apples. "You are certain?" Evelyn asked. There was a split in the trunk even then. Margaret pointed toward an old scar partly hidden beneath lichen. "We called it the crooked tree." Evelyn opened her notebook and marked it separately. If the tree recovered enough to fruit, its apples could help identify the variety. That did not guarantee a market, but it gave the orchard another possible use. Walter arrived while Margaret was still walking the rows. He stepped through the gate and looked at the open drainage channel. "You are digging around roots now, clearing an old watercourse," Evelyn said. Walter examined the stones. "I did not know this was here, neither did I." Margaret looked at him. "You were born after people stopped maintaining it." Walter ignored the comment. He looked toward the blue ribbon tree. "Even if those are russets, no supermarket wants them." "I am not planning for supermarkets," Evelyn said. "Then who buys them?" "Cider makers, direct customers, people who care about flavor more than appearance." Walter shook his head. "That is a small market. So is this orchard." He looked across the 12 acres. For years, everyone had judged the land as a failed commercial orchard. Evelyn was beginning to see that it might succeed only by becoming something different. Not large, not uniform, not dependent on one buyer. Margaret stopped beside another tree and lifted a low branch. This one used to bloom late. Evelyn checked the buds. They were firm but less swollen than those on the upper row. A late-blooming tree might escape some early frost damage. Again, the unevenness the market disliked could become useful. Different varieties could spread the risk across the season. Walter looked toward the piglets. "So now the pigs are historians," No, Evelyn said. "They cleared enough ground for someone who remembered the orchard to recognize it." Margaret smiled. The animals had not recovered the lost knowledge. They had made the old structure visible again. By evening, Evelyn had added several new layers to the orchard map: drainage channels, former cider rows, late-blooming trees, areas of rodent damage, living lower branches, trees that were truly dead. The orchard was no longer a single neglected block. It was becoming a record of how water markets, weather, and management had shaped each row differently. Ben looked over the map. "So what do we have?" "Possibly several old varieties. A blocked drainage system, yes. Living trees under dead branches, yes. And 42 pigs uncovering all of it." Evelyn looked toward the newest paddock. The animals were still rooting beneath the grass, following scents no person could detect from the road. "They are not bringing the orchard back," she said. "Not yet, not by themselves." She closed the notebook. "They are helping us understand what was lost, what failed, and what is still worth protecting." For the first time, the forgotten orchard had a history again, and once Evelyn understood why it had declined, she could finally begin deciding how it might live. The rain began before dawn. By breakfast, water was running from the roof in steady sheets and collecting along the lower orchard rows. Evelyn checked the fifth paddock from the kitchen window. The piglets were standing beneath their shelter. The ground around the feeder had already darkened. She planned to move them after the rain eased. It did not ease. By noon, the narrow lane between paddocks had become slick. The temporary fence charger also stopped working after water entered one of the connections. Evelyn decided to repair the fence first. That delay cost her. When she and Ben reached the paddock, the pigs were no longer waiting under shelter. They had moved into the wettest section and begun rooting where the soil was soft. The damage was immediate. What had been shallow disturbance on dry ground became deep holes in mud. Grass roots lifted in thick sheets. Fine apple roots appeared near the surface. Near the old drainage channel, water had begun carrying loose soil downhill. Ben stopped at the gate. They ruined it. Evelyn entered without answering. One young tree leaned slightly where the pigs had rooted close to its base. The protective wire had kept them from stripping the bark, but it had not protected the shallow roots beneath the wet soil. She opened the lane to the dry holding area. The pigs hesitated. They had found worms and soft roots in the mud. Evelyn scattered feed beyond the gate. Ben shook a bucket behind them. Slowly the animals followed. Once the final pig crossed, Evelyn closed the gate. The damaged paddock fell silent. Ben looked across the torn ground. Walter was right. About what? They can destroy the orchard. Yes. He looked surprised by her answer. You said the system was controlled. It was supposed to be. So what happened? I left them here too long. The pigs had not changed. The soil had. On dry ground, their rooting broke the grass mat and exposed hidden material. On saturated ground, the same behavior removed structure and created mud. A useful tool had become destructive because Evelyn had failed to adjust the timing. She walked to the leaning tree and pressed the soil back around the exposed roots. Several were still moist and flexible, others had been broken. This tree may survive, she said. May, that is the honest answer. They spent the afternoon repairing the paddock. Evelyn placed small branches across the beginning of the erosion line to slow the water. She covered the most exposed ground with straw and added a thin layer of compost. She did not bury the tree trunk. She did not push heavy machinery across the wet soil. The damaged section needed protection, not more pressure. Ben carried straw toward the lowest corner. Can we put the pigs back after it dries? Not this season. Why? The soil needs roots growing through it again. They would seed the open areas with low ground cover once conditions improved. Until then, straw would reduce runoff and shield the surface from direct rain. Evelyn also changed the rotation plan. The next paddocks would be smaller. Wet areas would receive fewer animals. The pigs would be moved before forecast rain, not after it began. Water and feed stations would be placed on firmer ground and moved more often so the animals would not concentrate in one location. Ben watched her rewrite the schedule. You planned all of this before. I planned for normal conditions. And now we plan for what actually happened. That evening, Walter's truck stopped beside the orchard. He walked to the damaged paddock and looked through the fence. Mud covered the lower section. Straw lay across the open soil. The leaning tree had been tied loosely to a support. Walter did not smile. I warned you. You did. You should have kept them out of the orchard. I should have moved them before the rain. That sounds like the same thing. It is not. Walter pointed toward the torn ground. The tree does not care about the difference. No. But the next paddock does. He studied her. You are still going to continue, with changes. You think straw repairs broken roots. No. Then what does it do? Protects the remaining soil while the ground recovers. Walter stepped closer to the fence. This is what pigs do. This is what pigs do when they remain too long on wet ground. He shook his head. You always have an explanation. This one is not an excuse. Evelyn opened her notebook and showed him the page. She had recorded the rain, the failed charger, the delayed move, the exposed roots, and the beginning of erosion. At the bottom, she had written management failure, animals not removed before soil became saturated. Walter read the line twice. You wrote that down. If I hide the mistake, I will repeat it. He handed the notebook back. For the first time, he had nothing to add. The next morning, Evelyn inspected the paddock again. The straw had slowed the runoff. The leaning tree remained upright. The soil was still damaged, but the erosion line had not grown. Ben stood beside her. Does this mean the idea failed? It means one part failed under the conditions we gave it. So the pigs can still help, if we control the conditions, and if we do not, she looked across the muddy ground. Then they can destroy in one day what we spent weeks trying to uncover. The lesson was more important than the damage. The pigs were not valuable because they disturbed the orchard. They were valuable only when Evelyn knew when that disturbance had gone far enough. The system did not depend on making the animals work harder. It depended on stopping them at the right time. The damaged paddock remained closed. For several weeks, Evelyn kept the piglets away from it, while the soil dried beneath straw. She checked the leaning tree every morning. Its roots had been exposed, but the leaves did not wilt. That did not mean it had escaped damage. It meant the tree was still trying. The mistake changed how Evelyn managed the rest of the orchard. She no longer treated every section the same. Dry upper ground could handle short periods of rooting. Lower areas received fewer pigs and shorter rotations. Before rain, the animals were moved to a firm holding area outside the orchard. The pigs continued clearing fallen fruit and breaking dense grass mats. But Evelyn understood that their work ended the moment the ground became readable. After that, the orchard needed human hands. She and Ben began with the marked trees. Red ribbons showed branches that were clearly dead. Blue marked living wood. Yellow meant they still needed time. Evelyn removed only the dead limbs that created immediate problems. Some crossed through living branches. Others blocked light from the lower canopy. Several had split and could fall during a storm. Ben stood beneath an old tree while Evelyn lowered a brittle branch with a rope. "Why not cut the whole top off?" he asked. "Because the tree still needs leaves. But most of the top is dead. Most is not all. A weak tree could not rebuild without enough living canopy to produce energy. Removing too much at once might make the tree look cleaner while leaving it less capable of recovery." Evelyn cut slowly. She cleaned the tools between suspicious trees and avoided leaving torn wounds. The orchard had been neglected for years. She did not expect severe pruning to repair it in one season. At the lower rows they returned to the buried drainage channel. Instead of opening the entire length, Evelyn cleared one short section at a time. After each rain, she checked where the water moved. The first opening drained a shallow pool near 3 trees. The second sent water toward a low corner where the soil could absorb it without exposing roots. The third section revealed a collapsed stone edge. Ben wanted to keep digging. Evelyn stopped him. "If we open that now, the water may cut through the loose soil, so we rebuild it first." "Yes." They reset the stones and packed the sides before clearing farther downhill. The work was slower than simply digging a ditch. It was also safer. Behind the pigs, Evelyn spread finished compost in thin layers and covered open ground with straw. She kept both materials away from the trunks. In the driest areas, she planted low clover to protect the soil and reduce the return of aggressive weeds. The orchard floor began to change. It was no longer hidden beneath uncontrolled growth. It was also no longer left bare. That balance mattered. One afternoon, Walter stopped at the fence and watched Ben carry straw between the rows. "I thought the pigs were doing the work," he said. "They did their part," Evelyn replied. Walter looked toward the pruned trees. "So now you are doing everything they could not." "Yes." He seemed almost satisfied. "That is what I said from the beginning. You said they were useless. I said they would not restore the orchard. They have not." Walter frowned. Evelyn pointed toward the exposed drainage stones. They showed us where the water system had failed. Then she pointed toward a blue ribbon branch. They uncovered living growth beneath the brush. Finally, she nodded toward the buckets of rotten fruit Ben had collected. They removed material that had been hiding pests. Walter looked across the rows. "And now we protect what they revealed." He walked to the nearest tree and examined a fresh pruning cut. "You left more dead-looking wood than I would have. Some of it is uncertain. It may never recover. Then I can remove it later. You are wasting time. Time is cheaper than cutting living wood by mistake." Walter said nothing. The orchard still looked rough. Many branches were bare. Several trunks carried wounds that would never close completely. A few trees had already been marked for removal because no green tissue remained anywhere above the roots. Evelyn did not pretend every tree could be saved. The truly dead ones would come out gradually. Their spaces would be replanted so the orchard would not depend entirely on aging trees. Ben helped remove the first dead tree near the northern boundary. Its roots were dark and brittle. The trunk showed decay through the center. He looked disappointed. "I thought more of them would be alive. Some will not be." Then the town was partly right. Being partly right is not the same as understanding the whole orchard. They left the healthy roots of nearby ground cover undisturbed and filled the worst depression with stable soil and compost. The empty space became part of the map. Not every loss needed to be hidden. By late winter, the orchard had been divided into three categories: trees with strong living structure, trees with limited life that needed another season, trees beyond recovery. The pigs had made those distinctions visible. The work afterward made those distinctions useful. One cold morning, Ben stopped beneath the crooked tree Margaret Bell remembered. The lower branches still carried blue ribbons. Several buds along one branch looked larger than before. "Are those leaves?" he asked. "Possibly. Flowers too early to know." He touched one gently. It was firm, not dry, not hollow. Evelyn looked across the orchard. The pigs had opened the ground. The drainage channels were beginning to function. Dead wood had been reduced. Living branches had more light. The orchard was not restored. But for the first time, every surviving tree had a clear reason to remain. And beneath the cold bark, some of them were beginning to respond. By early spring, the piglets no longer looked like the animals Evelyn had bought at auction. Their ribs were less visible. Their coats had become smoother. Their legs looked stronger, and they moved through the paddocks with more confidence. The smallest animals still lagged behind the rest, but even they had improved. Ben noticed the difference while filling the feeding troughs. "They do not look sick anymore." "They were never all sick," Evelyn said. "They looked sick. They looked underfed, stressed, and crowded." To most buyers, those conditions had meant the same thing. Weak animals were treated as bad animals. Evelyn had learned to separate appearance from cause. She kept 3 feeding stations instead of 1 so the smaller pigs could eat without being pushed aside. Water was available at all times, and the troughs were moved regularly to prevent mud from forming around them. The orchard provided shade space, insects, roots, and limited fallen fruit. But it did not provide a complete diet. Every morning, Evelyn measured a balanced feed ration. She also supplied minerals and checked the animals for coughing, diarrhea, limping, or sudden weight loss. The pigs could help in the orchard only if their own needs were met first. Ben placed a board across the narrow weighing crate. "Do we really have to weigh all of them again?" "We have to know whether they are improving. We can see that. We can see that some are larger." Evelyn opened her notebook. "That is not the same as knowing whether the smallest ones are gaining." They weighed the pigs in groups, recording the numbers beside the colored earmarks Evelyn had added after the first week. Several had gained steadily, a few had improved slowly, 2 had stopped gaining and needed closer attention. Ben looked at the page. "They still eat." "That does not mean they are using the feed well." Evelyn checked the 2 smaller animals separately. Their eyes were clear, and they moved normally, but both remained thin across the back. She changed their feeding arrangement and planned to speak with the veterinarian if they failed to improve. The point was not to force every pig to become identical. It was to identify which animals were recovering and which might have deeper problems. The orchard required the same approach. Some trees responded after the brush was removed and drainage improved. Others remained weak despite the same treatment. A few were already beyond recovery. Treating every pig or every tree as if it should respond equally would hide important differences. That afternoon, the herd entered a dry paddock near the western boundary. The ground cover there was thick but shallow. Evelyn expected the pigs to break it quickly. She planned to move them the following morning. Ben leaned on the fence. "They can clear more now. They are heavier, so we could make the paddocks larger. We could also damage more ground in less time." The animals' recovery had changed the pressure they placed on the orchard. When they were small, 42 piglets needed time to disturb a section. Now their stronger bodies and larger appetites meant the same job happened much faster. Evelyn shortened the rotation. Success had created a new management problem. The pigs were becoming more useful but also more capable of causing damage. Walter arrived while Evelyn was moving the water tank. He stopped near the fence and studied the herd. "I will admit they look better." Ben glanced toward his mother. Evelyn kept working. Walter pointed toward one of the largest pigs. "That one may finish well, possibly. What did you change?" "Feed access, water, space, less competition." So it was not the orchard. The orchard helped with movement, shade, and additional forage, but the feed made them grow. "Yes." Walter appeared surprised by the direct answer. People in town had begun telling the story differently. They said the pigs had become healthy because they were eating from the old orchard. That version sounded simple. It was also incomplete. The pigs had improved because Evelyn corrected several conditions at once. They received consistent nutrition. The weak animals could reach food. They had clean water. They were not packed into one dirty pen. The orchard was part of that system, not the entire explanation. Walter watched the pigs spread across the paddock. You paid almost nothing for them. I paid less because everyone expected them to fail. And now they have a chance. He looked toward the apple trees. You say the same thing about those. Because the cause was similar. Walter raised an eyebrow. Trees do not get pushed away from a trough. No. But they can lose water, light, air, and healthy soil because stronger growth takes over around them. She pointed toward a tree nearly hidden by old vines. That tree was not competing with another apple tree. It was competing with years of neglect. Walter examined the trunk. A blue ribbon marked one living lower branch. Red ribbons marked dead wood above it. You think everything here was weakened by bad conditions? No. Evelyn nodded toward the northern boundary where several dead trees had been removed. Some animals may have health problems we cannot correct. Some trees are too damaged to save. Then, how do you know which is which? We measure response. For the pigs, she tracked weight, appetite movement, and condition. For the orchard, she tracked living tissue bud development, drainage, new growth, and pest damage. Hope was not the method. Observation was. Walter looked at the notebook in Evelyn's hand. You record all of that. If I only remember the best results, I will misunderstand what worked. He turned toward the road. Before leaving, he looked back at the herd. No one will believe those are the same piglets. They are the same animals, Ben said. Walter paused. Ben continued. They just are not living under the same conditions. Walter gave a small nod and returned to his truck. That evening, Evelyn moved the pigs out of the paddock earlier than planned. They had already broken most of the grass mat and several patches of soil were visible. The old schedule no longer fit the stronger herd. Ben closed the gate behind them. They finished fast. They are not the piglets we started with. Across the orchard, the marked trees stood in the fading light. Their changes were harder to see. No dramatic growth covered the branches yet. But several buds were swelling, and the living bark remained firm beneath Evelyn's test cuts. The pigs had changed first because animals could respond quickly to better food and care. The orchard would take longer. Still, the same lesson was becoming visible in both. What looked like permanent weakness could sometimes be the result of conditions that had never allowed strength to appear. The first warm week arrived quietly. Snowmelt disappeared from the upper rows. The drainage channels carried water away from the lowest ground, and the orchard floor began to firm beneath the straw. Evelyn walked the trees each morning. She checked the same things in the same order: the bark, the buds, the soil around the roots, the condition of the protected trunks. Most branches still looked bare. From the road, nothing had changed. Up close, the buds were beginning to swell. Ben joined her beneath the crooked tree. Its upper crown remained gray, but the two lower branches marked with blue ribbon were different. The buds along them were rounder than they had been a week earlier. Ben pointed to one. That one is bigger. Yes. Is it a flower bud? Possibly. How can you tell? Leaf buds are usually narrower. Flower buds are often fuller. He leaned closer. So this tree may bloom. It may. Evelyn refused to say more. A swollen bud could still fail. Cold weather could damage it. A weak branch might not have enough stored energy to carry flowers. A tree could bloom and still produce no fruit. But the change mattered. The tree was responding. They continued into the upper orchard. Several blue ribbon branches carried firm buds. Others remained flat against the wood. Evelyn tested one uncertain tree by scraping a small section of bark. The tissue beneath was green. She checked another branch higher up. Brown. The lower structure remained alive, but the upper wood had died. Ben looked at the mixed ribbons. Will we have to cut the top later? Yes, but not all at once. Why wait if it is dead? Because we still need to see where the tree is pushing new growth. A hard cut made too early could remove useful structure or force weak shoots in the wrong places. Evelyn wanted the trees to reveal their living pattern before she reshaped them. Thomas Gray arrived near noon. He worked with the county agricultural office and had heard about the pig rotation from Walter Crane. Thomas carried a soil probe pruning knife and several sample bags. He began with the damaged paddock. The ground was still rough, but new cover had started to grow beneath the straw. You kept the pigs out, he said. Since the rain. That was necessary. He pushed the probe into the soil. The top layer had recovered enough to hold together, though the structure beneath remained compressed in places. This section will need time, he said. Do not put heavy animals back here soon. I was not planning to. Thomas inspected the exposed roots of the leaning tree. Several had died where they were broken, but the remaining root zone appeared stable. "The tree may survive," he said. Ben looked at Evelyn. "That is what she said." Thomas smiled. "Then she gave you the correct answer." They moved toward the upper rows. Thomas examined the drainage channels, the protected trunks, and the limited pruning cuts. "You have not over-pruned," he said. "Some people think I left too much. On strong trees, heavier correction might be possible. These are not strong trees." He stopped beneath the crooked tree. The buds on its lower branch were clearly swollen. Thomas cut one open carefully. Inside were pale green tissues folded tightly together. He examined the shape. "This is likely a mixed bud." "What does that mean?" Ben asked. "It may produce leaves and flowers." Ben smiled. "So the orchard is coming back." Thomas closed the knife. "One bud is not an orchard." The smile disappeared. Thomas looked across the rows. "Several trees are showing activity. That means living tissue survived. It does not mean the orchard is restored." He listed the risks calmly. A late freeze could destroy flowers. Weak roots might not support fruit. Pests could damage new growth. Some trees might use their remaining energy to bloom once, and then decline. The first response had to be observed, not celebrated too early. Evelyn nodded. That was why she had kept records. She wanted to know which trees formed buds, which opened leaves, which flowered, and which held fruit later. Without that sequence, one white spring could create the illusion of full recovery. Thomas looked toward the pigs in the holding pasture. "People are saying the animals fertilized the trees and caused the buds." "The buds began forming last season," Evelyn said. "Correct. The pigs had arrived too late to create flower buds immediately. Their work had removed fallen fruit, exposed drainage failures, and reduced dense ground cover. Their manure added nutrients, but nutrients alone could not explain what was happening. The orchard already contained living roots and stored energy. The management changes had given some trees a better chance to use them." Thomas examined another blue ribbon branch. "You should keep the pigs away from these rows once the buds open, because of the soil and the trees. Rooting near active roots, rubbing against trunks, or disturbing pollinators would create new problems." The animals' role was changing again. They had been useful during cleanup. They would be less useful during flowering. Evelyn marked the blooming sections as restricted. By evening, Thomas had confirmed active buds on 13 trees. 7 others showed only leaf growth. Several remained uncertain. 9 were completely dead. The numbers were not impressive enough to justify celebration, but they were enough to prove that the orchard had not been empty of life. Ben stood beneath the crooked tree as the temperature began to fall. "What happens if the buds open?" "We watch the weather, and if flowers appear, we protect what we can. And if apples grow, then we manage those too." He sighed. "There is always another step. That is what recovery is." The orchard had not returned. It had reached a point where return was possible. Before sunset, Evelyn checked the crooked tree one last time. A thin line of pink-white tissue had appeared at the edge of the largest bud. It was not an open flower, not yet. But for the first time in years, the forgotten orchard was preparing to bloom. 3 days later, the crooked tree opened its first flower. Evelyn found it just after sunrise. 5 white petals had unfolded around a pale center on the lowest living branch. Above it, the dead crown remained gray against the morning sky. Ben stood beside her without speaking. The flower was small, but it changed the meaning of the tree. For years, people had called it dead because most of its branches looked empty. Now one living section had produced proof that could be seen without scraping bark or cutting open buds. By afternoon, more flowers appeared. The upper orchard responded first. Trees on the higher, better-drained ground opened clusters along their strongest branches. The middle rows followed more slowly. Some trees produced only leaves. Others remained bare. The orchard did not recover evenly, but from the road the white blossoms began joining together. That night the temperature rose. A warm wind moved through the valley and pushed the remaining buds open. By morning, large parts of the forgotten orchard had turned white. Cars slowed beside the fence. People stopped to take photographs. The same men who had laughed at the auction now stood beneath the trees, staring at flowers above the pig paddocks. Walter Crane arrived before noon. He parked near the gate and walked into the upper rows. For several minutes he said nothing. White petals covered the branches marked with blue ribbon. Bees moved between the open clusters. Beneath them, the orchard floor was no longer buried under uncontrolled grass and rotting fruit. The pigs rested in a holding pasture beyond the trees. Walter looked from the blossoms to the animals. So they did it. Evelyn shook her head. They helped. Those trees had not bloomed like this in years. That does not mean the pigs created the flowers. Walter touched a blossom cluster. What else changed? The ground cover was reduced. The drainage channels were reopened. Dead wood was removed. Living branches received more light. And the manure. Some nutrients returned to the soil, but these flower buds began forming before the pigs arrived. Walter looked at her. Then why did the orchard bloom now? Because some trees were still alive and several pressures were reduced at the same time. The explanation was less dramatic than the story people wanted. They preferred to believe that sickly piglets had entered a dead orchard and brought it back to life. Evelyn understood why. The truth involved blocked water, hidden roots, old varieties, rodent damage, careful pruning, ground protection, weather, and months of observation. A miracle could be explained in one sentence. Management could not. Margaret Bell arrived later that afternoon. She walked slowly toward the crooked tree and held one of the blossom clusters between her fingers. "I remember this smell," she said. The flowers carried a light sweetness that had been absent from the orchard for years. Margaret pointed toward another row. Those trees used to bloom later. Several still held closed buds. The variation might help protect part of the orchard if a cold night returned. Not every tree would flower at the same time. Ben noticed insects moving between the rows. "Are those enough bees? Too early to know," Evelyn said. Flowers did not guarantee fruit. They needed successful pollination. They needed suitable weather. The branches needed enough strength to carry what developed afterward. A strong bloom on a weak tree could become another form of stress. Thomas Gray returned the next morning. He inspected the orchard while visitors gathered near the gate. "The bloom is better than I expected," he said. "Will it hold fruit?" "Some of it." He pointed toward a heavily flowered branch. "This tree may set more than it can support." Ben looked confused. "More apples would be good. Not if the branch breaks or the tree exhausts itself. If too many young fruits formed, Evelyn would need to thin them. Saving every apple could weaken the trees they were trying to restore." Thomas also found several blossoms damaged by insects and one cluster with signs of disease. The orchard still carried old problems. The white flowers had made those problems harder for visitors to notice. At the fence, people asked Evelyn how long they should leave pigs beneath their own trees. She gave them the same warning. "Do not copy only what you see today." She showed them the protected trunks. The small paddocks. The damaged wet section that remained closed. The record showing when the animals entered and left each area. One extra day on wet soil caused real damage, she said. The pigs helped because we controlled where they worked and stopped them early. Some visitors listened. Others continued photographing the blossoms. Walter remained near the crooked tree. "I thought you were wasting time," he said quietly. "You were right about some risks, but wrong about the orchard. We were both guessing before we examined it." He looked toward the white rose. "You knew it was alive. I knew parts of it might be." That distinction mattered to Evelyn. She had never known the orchard would bloom. She had only refused to destroy it before learning what remained. By evening, petals had begun falling onto the protected soil beneath the trees. The orchard looked transformed, but Evelyn did not call it restored. 9 trees were still dead. Several others had produced only leaves. Some blossoms would fail. Cold weather insects or weak roots could still reduce the crop. The white orchard was not the end of the work. It was evidence that the work had earned another season. Ben stood near the gate as the last visitors left. "They all think the pigs saved it. They helped us find what could still be saved. What is the difference?" Evelyn looked across the living branches rising beneath the dead crowns. The pigs did not bring life into the orchard. A breeze loosened another wave of petals. They uncovered the life everyone had stopped looking for. For several days, the orchard remained white. Visitors treated the bloom as proof that the farm had succeeded. Evelyn did not. Flowers were only the beginning of a new set of risks. A late frost could damage them. Poor pollination could leave branches empty. Weak trees could set more fruit than their roots could support. And the pigs useful during cleanup could now disturb the orchard at the wrong time. Evelyn moved the herd to pasture beyond the northern fence. Ben watched the pigs follow the feed bucket away from the trees. "I thought they were supposed to stay in the orchard. They were supposed to do a job. And now the job is finished. For this stage, the orchard floor no longer needed heavy disturbance." Bees and other insects were moving between the blossoms and the roots were entering active growth. The pigs could damage shallow roots, compact wet areas, or rub against protected trunks. A useful animal did not need to remain in the same place all year. Evelyn marked the flowering rows as closed. Only after harvest would the pigs return for short cleanup rotations. 3 nights later, the temperature dropped. Cold air settled into the lowest rows. By dawn, several blossoms had browned around the edges. Ben touched one damaged flower. Is it dead? This one may be. He looked across the orchard. How many did we lose? We will know later. The upper trees had escaped most of the cold. The lower section showed more damage, especially where frost collected near the wet ground. Once again, the orchard responded differently from row to row. The uneven land that complicated management also protected part of the crop. Not every tree bloomed at the same time. Not every section held the same temperature. The orchard survived because all its parts were not identical. As the weather-warmed petals began falling, small green fruit appeared on some branches. Other blossoms dropped without setting anything. The strongest trees formed clusters of several apples close together. Ben smiled when he found the first one. There are 5. Evelyn examined the branch. It was thin and still recovering. Later we may leave only 1 or 2. His smile disappeared. You are going to remove healthy apples if the branch cannot carry them. That feels like throwing away the crop. It protects the crop we keep. A weak tree forced to carry too much fruit could produce small apples, break branches, or enter winter without enough stored energy. Recovery did not mean demanding maximum production immediately. Sometimes the best decision was to accept less. Thomas Gray returned to inspect the developing fruit. He found signs of insect damage in several clusters and marked them for removal. The pigs reduced some old fruit and exposed pest areas, he said, but they did not eliminate every problem. Evelyn had expected that. She collected damaged fruitlets and continued monitoring the trees. She avoided treating the entire orchard as if every branch had the same level of pressure. Near the southern boundary, she planted a narrow strip of flowering plants outside the pig fence. The current bloom had attracted pollinators, but Evelyn wanted food sources available before and after the apple flowers opened. Ben scattered seed along the prepared ground. Will this help this year? Probably not much. Then why do it now? Because next spring begins with what we build this season. The same had been true of the orchard. The white bloom had appeared quickly, but the conditions behind it had taken months to create. By early summer, the difference between flowering and fruiting was clear. Some trees carried small apples, some carried only leaves. Several weak trees had dropped nearly everything. The crooked tree held fewer than 20 fruits. Walter stood beneath it and looked disappointed. With that many blossoms, I expected more. So did most people, Evelyn said. Was the bloom wasted? No. She pointed toward the healthy new leaves and shoots. The tree is also rebuilding wood and storing energy. Walter looked at the scattered fruit. You will not get much of a harvest. Not this year. He glanced toward the pasture where the pigs were feeding, and the animals. They will still have value. The orchard did not need to repay every cost through apples alone. The pigs were growing, the trees were recovering, the drainage system was working better. The land was becoming manageable again. Each part contributed something different. By midsummer, Evelyn began thinning the most crowded fruit clusters. Ben worked beside her, removing the smallest and most damaged apples. At first he hesitated over every one. Then he saw a thin branch bending under the weight of 6 fruits. He removed 4. The branch lifted slightly. That is enough, he asked. For now, they moved to the next tree. The town had celebrated when the orchard turned white because white blossoms were easy to see. The harder decisions came afterward. Moving the pigs away, accepting frost loss, removing damaged fruit, thinning healthy apples, protecting weak trees from the pressure to prove themselves too quickly. The orchard had shown that it was alive. Now Evelyn had to keep success from becoming another kind of damage. By late summer, the surviving apples had begun to color. The crop was small. Some trees carried only a few fruits. Others held enough to fill several baskets. Many apples were uneven in size, and their skins were rougher than the fruit sold in supermarkets. Walter examined one from the crooked tree. No packing house will take this. I am not selling to a packing house, Evelyn said. She cut the apple open. The flesh was firm and strongly scented. Its flavor was sharp at first, then sweet. Margaret Bell tasted a slice. That is the old cider apple. The fruit did not need perfect skin to have value. Evelyn separated the harvest into 3 groups. The cleanest apples would be sold directly. Smaller fruit would go to a local cider maker. Damaged apples would be removed from the orchard so pests could not continue developing inside them. Ben placed the first full basket on the scale. It is not much. It is more than the orchard produced last year. That was nothing. Then this is a beginning. Evelyn did not advertise the farm as a miracle. She posted a simple notice at the market: apples from the restored Hart orchard. Limited first harvest. People arrived because they remembered the white blossoms and the sickly piglets. Some expected perfect fruit. Evelyn told them exactly what they were buying. These are old varieties. The sizes will differ. Some are better for cooking or cider than eating fresh. Most customers appreciated the honesty. By noon, every basket had sold. The cider maker purchased the smaller fruit and asked whether Evelyn could supply more the following year. "I cannot promise volume yet," she said. "Then promise me the first call." She agreed. The first harvest did not repay every cost of the orchard, but the farm now had more than one source of value. The pigs had continued growing in pasture. Most were large enough to sell in autumn. Their sale would cover feed expenses, fencing repairs, and several young replacement trees. When the first group left the farm, Ben stood beside the empty pen. They were the reason people laughed. They were part of it. And now they are paying for new trees, partly. Evelyn used the money carefully. She did not expand the herd. The orchard no longer needed 42 large pigs working beneath the trees. Their weight and strength could create damage much faster than when they were small. She kept only a few animals for future short rotations after harvest. The rest were sold. A system had to change when its parts changed. The pigs had begun as small, weak animals suited to light disturbance. As they grew, keeping all of them in the orchard would have become dangerous. Walter visited while Evelyn and Ben planted the first replacement tree in a gap along the northern row. "You are selling most of the pigs," he said. "Yes. I thought they were your secret." "They were never a secret." "Then why not keep using them?" "Because the orchard needs less disturbance now, and the pigs can do more damage than before." Walter looked toward the pasture. "So the method stops working when they grow. The method changes." Evelyn pressed soil around the young tree. "After harvest, a small group can remove fallen fruit in short rotations. 42 full-size pigs would destroy the ground." Walter nodded slowly. For months he had expected Evelyn to defend the pigs as the answer to everything. Instead, she kept defining their limits. That made her results harder to dismiss. A week later, Walter asked her to visit his old pear block. It stood near a creek where the soil remained wet through spring. "I was thinking of putting pigs there," he said. "Not until the ground is firm. And after that, small sections. Protected trunks, short rotations." He looked toward the neglected rows. "How short? Until they have done the job, not until the calendar says they should move." Walter smiled. "That is not a very simple rule. It is simpler than repairing damaged roots." Back at the Hart orchard, the final apples were collected before they could rot beneath the trees. The pigs returned briefly after harvest. They entered only the dry upper rows. They ate fallen fruit, searched through leaf litter, and moved on before the surface became bare. This time Evelyn did not need to discover what was hidden. She already had maps, records, and 2 seasons of observations. The pigs were no longer opening a forgotten orchard. They were helping maintain a recovering one. Ben added the harvest numbers to the notebook. The total was modest, but every living row had improved. Some trees had produced fruit. Others had grown stronger branches that might bear the following year. Several dead spaces now held young replacements. The orchard was not fully restored. It had become productive enough to continue. That was more important. The town had expected either complete failure or a miracle. Evelyn had built something less dramatic and more useful, a system that could survive another season. The following spring the orchard bloomed again. This time the white flowers spread beyond the upper rows. Several trees in the middle section opened strong clusters, and even the damaged tree from the muddy paddock produced a small line of blossoms. The orchard was still uneven. Some trees remained weak. Several young replacements were too small to flower. A few old trunks stood only as markers until Evelyn had time to remove them, but no one called the orchard dead anymore. Cars slowed along the road, though fewer people stopped to take photographs. The bloom was no longer a surprise. It had become part of the farm. Ben walked the rows with the orchard notebook. He checked the drainage channels, marked damaged blossoms, and recorded which trees had returned stronger than the year before. At the crooked tree, he stopped beneath the first branch that had bloomed. The old blue ribbon had faded almost white. "Should we remove this?" he asked. "Leave it," Evelyn said. "We already know the branch is alive. It reminds us that we once did not. Beyond the orchard, 6 pigs grazed in a separate pasture. Evelyn had kept only enough animals for short rotations after harvest. They would never again move through every row at once. Their role was smaller now. That did not make it less important. After fruiting season, they would help remove fallen apples and disturb selected patches of heavy ground cover. Then they would leave before the soil became bare or wet. The orchard no longer needed rescue, it needed maintenance. Walter Crane arrived near midday. He walked through the gate without waiting to be invited and stopped beneath the blooming trees. "My pear block is draining better," he said. "You cleared the old channel, only part of it. And the pigs, 4 animals, 3 days. Then I moved them." Evelyn nodded. "No mud, not this time." Walter looked across the Hart orchard. "You know what people still say, that the piglets saved it. They like that story. It is easier than the truth." Evelyn smiled. "The truth has more steps." The sickly piglets had helped clear fallen fruit, expose hidden roots, open paths through brush, and reveal the old drainage system. But they had not pruned the trees. They had not protected damaged soil. They had not repaired stone channels or monitored pests. They had not moved themselves before heavy rain. The animals had been useful because Evelyn had controlled where they worked, what they could reach, and when they had to stop. The orchard recovered because the pigs were followed by careful management. Walter looked toward the pasture. "You sold most of them." The orchard changed. "So did the pigs." "Yes." The same animals once too weak to interest a buyer had grown too large to remain safely beneath the trees. Their success had required Evelyn to change the system again. That was the part people rarely included when they repeated the story. They talked about buying rejected animals. They talked about white blossoms appearing over a forgotten orchard. They did not talk about reducing the herd, removing dead trees, thinning fruit, or accepting that some sections would take years to recover. Ben joined them with the notebook. "We have flower buds on 31 old trees," he said. "How many last year?" Walter asked. 13 confirmed. Walter looked impressed. "And the harvest?" Ben glanced at Evelyn. "We are not estimating yet." Walter laughed. "You have trained him well." "No," Evelyn said. "The orchard trained both of us." They had learned not to confuse early signs with final results. Living roots were not fruit. Buds were not blossoms. Blossoms were not apples. A first harvest was not a permanent business. Each stage had only earned the chance to continue. In the afternoon, Margaret Bell came to see the crooked tree. She stood beneath its flowers and breathed in their scent. "It looks like it did when I was young," she said. Evelyn looked up at the dead section, still visible above the living branches. "Not exactly." Margaret smiled. "No, but it belongs to the future again." That evening, white petals drifted across the protected soil. The pigs rested beyond the fence. Young replacement trees stood in the gaps left by those that could not be saved. The orchard was neither new nor fully restored. It was a mixture of old wood, new growth, repaired ground, and carefully limited pressure. People had laughed because they believed weakness was permanent. They had looked at the piglets and seen animals that would never grow. They had looked at the orchard and seen trees that would never produce again. Evelyn had seen something different. Not guaranteed success, not a miracle, only signs that both had been judged before their conditions were understood. The piglets did not bring a dead orchard back to life. They helped uncover the life that neglect had hidden. What restored it was everything Evelyn did after that discovery.